St. George's Park, my latest painting. I just got back from the trip away to Bristol doing the print drops, and Laura was like, oh, there's this cool thing going on at the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art in Newcastle. Well, it's in Gateshead, Newcastle Gateshead, but it's on the Gateshead side of the river. It's a cool place. Been there loads across the years, because I used to live in Newcastle. And they are doing an open call for artists. I believe they choose 200 pieces at the end to show. So I thought, why not? I'll go for it. It was one entry, max size a metre by 1 metre. I didn't have any canvas in, I didn't have anything to do it on. So Laura was like, well, you know, I'll buy you a canvas because it's a gallery entry thing. So I got a self canvas. I went and got the biggest size I could that I was allowed, because I'm obnoxious like that. So this one's also off the shelf and cheap. So it's a metre wide by 70 centimetres tall, which is just 30 centimetres off their max size of a metre by a metre. And then I figured I had a sketch that I wanted to work on from when I was down in Bristol. I've done it in very bold colour, so I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to put onto the canvas. And then I was figuring about how to do it, and I wanted to come at it with a mixed media approach, and utilise some of my older kind of paints, techniques, materials, things like that, stuff from my miniature painting days. So I had a few things out. I've got the airbrush, that's what you can see me using there, but kind of inks. I had some oil pastels, paint pens, what else, the oil paints that I use. I just got them all out and prepared everything. I prepared a few colours for the airbrush to just drop in. You see me using them there, so I think I prepared up like a blue, a magenta, a yellow and a green. Now when I was down in Bristol, I was dropping prints on the street. Bristol is internationally known for its street art scene and its kind of vibrancy and all of that. So everywhere that I was putting these prints, I was trying to, I suppose, follow the etiquette of street art. Where do you put it? Where don't you put it? You don't put it on somewhere that's going to be a noisome one, like private land or whatever. But you kind of put it somewhere where there's like maybe a little build-up of art already, or music posters, or graffiti that hasn't been removed. So you know it's not going to get painted over, and it's not going to be too much of an annoyance. So what I was looking at is these little spaces that had kind of multiple build-ups of different types of art or culture or marketing or all sorts of different things built up on the same space. So I come back with this idea of kind of, what if I take a canvas and do a sketch, but the idea is the sketch is kind of moving through a progression similar to the space of wall or area where things change and move from kind of graffiti and tags and scribbles and chalk drawings from children, and they move through to kind of pieces and throw-ups and graffiti, and then they eventually get kind of held up as an art space, and then something comes along and redefines the space, like a large mural, or something like, I suppose in Bristol you'd have something like a Banksy piece comes along and kind of defines that as that is now a piece of art, that is now an artistic expression on a wall, and not just kind of graffiti or scribbles or drawings. Or I wanted to represent that through the progression of the mixed media and how I was using it. So I started with the airbrush to simulate spray cans and kind of spray painting. I was doing it very loose. Everything I did on this was very loose. It was also very quick. I was really wanting to capture an energy, a single session energy. And I think I started this one at, it was about 7 p.m. I had all my materials built up during the day, sorted out. I'd mixed some paints down, thinned the acrylics, ready for the airbrush. So I think I began the project at about 7 p.m. and I finished at about 3 a.m. And it was a fairly focused, 6, 7, 8 hours. I filmed 2.5 hours of video across it, and I've edited it down to 28 minutes. But you can see the speed at which I was kind of laying the inks and the paints on. Now, the entire first half of the process was working in acrylics or variations of acrylic. So I had the airbrush with a thinned acrylic paint. That was the base layer. And then all of this here is inks. So I had a yellow ink, a blue ink and a magenta ink. And what I was doing is just going in and I think it's a really cheap liner brush. I think the bristles are about 1.5 inches long, so you can work really smooth and really free. It's the type of brush sign writers use. I'd never ever used it before, and I picked it out of the pot by random just to mix the paints up for the airbrush. And I thought, actually that's beautiful, because it looks like a kind of like a quill or something that I could use for the inks. So the inks were flowing unbelievably beautifully, and I could work fast and just apply colour where I wanted the colour and create that energy. Here again with, this might be the paint of this, but I can't see what I'm holding. It might just be the little glass jar of paint that I've mixed up. But I was also understanding that these acrylics were going to dry very quickly, so I could work quite thick, I could let them drip, I could let them rub about the canvas, I could let them mix slightly. This is very different to working in just oils where they stay wet for 2-3 days. So the oil paint was effectively going to be my opacity layer, and that's what I was going to come in with later on for the final layers. But even then, I broke a couple of the rules and put some inks and acrylics on top of the oils, knowing they would kind of wash and blend off and not mix. But yeah, it was an interesting project. The whole thing was very fluid. Like I said, trying to capture a form of dynamic energy that I'd seen within the street art scene and the Bristol art scene, which, is moving up. It's moving up north. I've seen some interesting things happening in North Shields. I've seen some murals and call-outs for artists for murals in Newcastle. But yeah, I was trying, obviously I'm entering this to the Baltic Contemporary Centre for Contemporary Arts, And I wanted to not loosen up my feel, what I was doing, but give it this contemporary energy, or give it a contemporary edge, and try and link it to street art. I had an interesting idea when I was there. I was kind of like, everything in Bristol is street art, but what about if we just put art on the street that people could move or take away? How would that happen? Is it an interesting idea? I think it is. It's very old school, impressionist type thing. And I've kind of set all of the acrylic work. I've got little sweeps and swooshes, I've got drips, I've got very bold colour. I've gone in thinking very much just like a child colouring in. Trying to just scribble colour in places, but obviously following a sense of sort of perspective and form. And just working very prismatically, blues in the shadows, strengthened by purples, yellow light, and then allowing the magenta base on the canvas to be very prominent as well, to allow that to shine through, and try not to cover every part of everything as I was going along, trying to leave the remaining layers, the previous layers, try to leave a little bit of that kind of sketch-like quality, kind of leaving a small amount of the airbrushing showing, leaving a small amount of the liner work showing. And like I say, they were all just techniques that I wanted to bring forward from miniature painting, which is base coat, lining, acrylics, washes, glazes, inks. This here, working with the dark first for the oils. I don't even think I put any of the other colours or mixed any other colours up. At this point it was primarily only working with the dark and just trying to really gain a sense of the form and the shape, the silhouettes of the trees in the landscape, and sculpt it over the top of that kind of blended and drippy and childlike underdrawing. So it was just following previous line and previous structure, things that had gone in very loosely, and trying just to increase the vibrancy. I've been working on this across the previous paintings, really just pushing my colour and volume into just two opposites. So, red and green, yellow and blue. And just working with that direct opposite, the vibrancy that you get from it. And you have to have these like bridging colours in the centre, and I'm learning how to remove those bridging colours, or at least harmonise them with the rest of the painting, to allow that kind of like dark and light to really define what I'm trying to do and really define the shape of things. this side, now just starting to mix up colour in the oil. So I put all the darks on. I'm thinking about the mid-tones in it. So I was going to go with a very vibrant orange, and then I thought, nah, I don't really want a red paint in here. I'd been using magenta inks, I'd been using magenta acrylic, or like a purple acrylic, and I had that magenta undertone in, and I wanted to keep that as kind of my red tone in the image and leave that very apparent, especially in the sky and also the river. I'd made a choice. I was going to put a river in on that center slice, and I made a choice to just leave it the magenta undertone in. I scribbled some drips on and then some little ducks on it by the end, but for some reason I just never felt the need to colour it, and it felt, because I'd made this choice to not have these bright oranges on the trees and dull them down to a more brown tone, that magenta slice in the middle became almost the red, or it became the final application of colour without having to be applied, because it was already there from the very beginning. And I thought that was right clever and cool, and just also it fitted in like I say, the colour space. And see, it left, there's instances of the airbrushing that's coming in there, the drips, the kind of the scribbliness. So yeah, it was a very conscious choice to leave that uncovered. But I do remember wanting to paint it in maybe 4 or 5 times across the process. I'd figure out a kind of shade on the brush, or as I was going, and I'd figure, do I want to put it there or do I not? This was an interesting bit. So I remembered I had 4 of these paint pens that I had, that Laura had bought for a project making for my niece last year. So I ran upstairs and grabbed the paint pens and came down, and I thought, I'm just going to do all these like scribbles, and I hold the pen in like a really awkward way, like a child would, and just sort of push it over the canvas, and I just add like grasses and texture, and I just say I'd use 2 at the same time, just to sort of, I don't know why, I was just doing it. It was just really fun, and it just felt like a cool thing to do. This was like the child coming in and scribbling on something and trying to add maybe, I don't know, add their own little imaginings to the thing that was already there. And these are the little stick figures going in, which, yeah, I was just thinking about my niece and nephew, so I just put 2 little stick figures in there, and then I thought I'd put a few in on the other side, and eventually they get semi-covered, but just was trying to reinforce this sketch-like, childlike quality of building artwork from its simplest stages to its kind of final piece that is formed from everything that's gone before. So at this point, I'm still working with the paint pens, but I knew I hadn't put any bright tones of the oil paint on, and I also hadn't put any of the kind of the green, this work here that I'm putting in. So this is basically just working the oils in the way that I would usually work them on a landscape, kind of building these little rough shapes and spreading the oil around, but trying to kind of follow these scribbles underneath, trying to follow the base sketch, trying to fill it in a little bit, trying to leave something of the original. Not thinking too much about the placement, and then really just trying to emphasize the strong sense of light and dark that's coming, you know, from the sunshine and the shadows. This is where I didn't know where to stop. I didn't really know where to begin. I was just thinking sort of bushes or flat plain or grasses, or I was just keeping the theme very loose in my mind, and basically trying to treat it like a child, trying to paint like a child, a 38-year-old child. What am I doing here? Oh, the green. This is putting a hill in the background and just keeping it very formed with the rays of light. Green, 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 like that. Again, I just mixed up two greens, one darker shade, one lighter shade, and then pushed into the darks or pushed into the light, depending on where I was working. I believe I kept everything prismatic as well on this palette. I didn't allow white anywhere other than the paint pens, which was annoying because I'd put a load of white paint on the palette, and now I need to figure out a use for it because I didn't use any of it, and it meant that my brightest values were almost the yellow, the pure cadmium yellow, and the yellow ink, which I believe was a cadmium yellow ink. It'll be a hue, it wouldn't have been a proper cadmium, but and then this is going back in, so I go back in with the yellow paint, the acrylic, possibly the yellow ink, and then I build up to the yellow oil paint. So just as I had a whole layer or a whole pass of kind of darker tones and darker shades, this is me going in with that bright layer now, that top end layer. And again, I think I'm using that liner brush. So you see how fast it is? Just dip, quick shapes, dip, define a bush, quick shape, quick dip. So this is like, again, so this is where I was working between the oil paint, which would usually be a big no-no, but because there was gaps where the oil paint wasn't, I could float the acrylic into it and just keep it really, really loose, especially with that liner brush. I have to do something again with the liner brush because it was very different. Even when I used to use acrylics, I would have used a round, not a liner. And having that extra flexibility allowed me to just move incredibly quickly and almost like I was using a pen, and I could get on very, very, very fine lines, and but very quickly as well. Really quick, fast. Movement all through the wrist, and just, yeah, and it also holds a hell of a lot of paint. Which you can see how I'm just building that brightness up. Oh, now I got tube, full tube, cadmium yellow, splodge, splodge, splodge. Get the brightness of that sun coming through. And then it was basically, after that, a case of just warming up some of the yellow tones that I'd used on the painting from this kind of like lemon yellow into the warmer cadmium yellow, which again just emphasized this warm sunlight, very intense low sun contrast that I set out to do in the initial painting. This is coming up towards the end of the painting, the finishing of it. And if I'm honest, I was really pleased with it. It was a push forward into an idea. At the start, I didn't think it was going to go any well or anything. And like you say, just trust the process. And yeah, I was very happy with it. And I hope, fingers crossed, that it will get chosen to be shown at the Baltic Art Gallery, because that would just be something else. So yeah, one session, about 8 hours painting, mixed media, St George's Park.